Boom! The turboshaft engine of a $30 million Apache helicopter just exploded into failure during live combat simulation. 3 PhD engineers are sweating bullets. The Pentagon is watching. Careers are ending in real time. "Get someone who actually knows engines!" the colonel screams. Enter Robert Mitchell, 71 years old, hands covered in burn scars, carrying a toolbox older than the engineers trying to fix this disaster. They're laughing. At him. At his ancient tools. At the idea that some old-timer could solve what their computers couldn't. But Bob's scarred fingers are already moving, touching, listening. 15 minutes. That's all he needs to expose their million-dollar failure. Because what none of these young geniuses know is that Bob didn't just learn about turboshaft engines, he invented the core technology they're all staring at. 40 years ago, when they were still in diapers, the engine that's failing, it's literally his baby, and it's about to recognize its father's touch. If you believe real expertise deserves respect regardless of age, type "respect" in the comments. This story reveals what happens when experience meets arrogance. Former Marine Corps Sergeant Robert "Bob" Mitchell is a turbine specialist by both calling and instinct. He never pursued advanced degrees. After losing both parents in a car crash at age 8, he bounced between relatives in small Texas towns, spending most of his time in his uncle's crop-dusting hangar, taking apart anything with moving parts just to understand how they breathed life into metal. He was the kind of kid who would rather listen to the whistle of turbine compression than join any schoolyard conversation. The rhythmic pulse of jet fuel igniting, the precise ballet of turbine blades cutting air, these were the sounds that spoke to him in a language others couldn't hear. By age 14, he had already rebuilt his uncle's damaged Bell 47 helicopter engine, using nothing but salvaged parts, intuition, and an understanding of mechanical harmony that seemed to flow through his fingertips like electricity. At 18, he enlisted in the Marines, hoping to serve something greater than himself and escape the poverty that had defined his childhood. During his service, Bob was never the loudest voice in the briefing room, but he was always the first one they called when an Apache's turboshaft started singing the wrong song in hostile territory, or when a transport helicopter needed its engine coaxed back to life in the middle of a dust storm. He built a quiet reputation in the Corps as the sergeant who didn't seek medals but delivered miracles when rotors needed to spin and lives hung in the balance. While others followed technical manuals step by step, Bob seemed to feel the heartbeat of the turbine, to sense the whisper of metal under stress. It was like he had a conversation with machines that others couldn't understand. Those who knew him, and there weren't many, saw him as gifted. At 71, he carries the weight of profound loss. His twin sons, David and Daniel, killed instantly when a drunk driver ran a red light in 2001. They were 22, fresh out of college, full of plans he'll never see fulfilled. His wife Martha left him 3 years after the accident. "You talk more to engines than to me," she said the day she packed her bags. She wasn't wrong. After losing the boys, Bob found that machines were the only things that still made sense, the only companions that didn't ask him to pretend he was healing when he wasn't. His military career effectively ended in 1983 when a helicopter engine fire left him with third-degree burns covering both hands and forearms. The flames had melted synthetic materials into his skin, leaving raised scars that make his fingers look like weathered leather. The Marine Corps said his compromised dexterity made him unsuitable for precision engine work. His disability pension covers basic needs, nothing more. The multiple skin grafts and reconstructive surgeries drained his savings years ago. To make ends meet, Bob works repairing small aircraft engines at municipal airports around Phoenix, Arizona. He always arrives before dawn, his rust-stained Chevy pickup truck coughing down the tarmac, a battle-worn toolbox riding shotgun, and black coffee in a thermos that's older than most of the planes he fixes. Local pilots know him by sight. The old Marine with the steady gaze and hands that tell stories of fire and determination. He doesn't talk much, just asks what's running rough and gets to work. Sometimes he goes entire days without saying more than a dozen words. But when he speaks about engines, people listen. His words carry the weight of someone who's felt metal scream and learned to make it sing again. Younger mechanics often find him intimidating, even unsettling. But the veteran pilots understand. Bob's not there to socialize. He's there because something that should soar is grounded, and when turbines fail, somehow the call always finds its way to him. He lives alone in a converted garage behind Sanchez Aviation, a small charter service that lets him stay in exchange for after-hours maintenance work. It's a modest space, just a cot, a hot plate, and walls covered with turbine diagrams he's drawn from memory over the years. Bob doesn't complain. He doesn't know any other way to live. Understanding the language of spinning metal is how he exists. Every irregular vibration, every off-pitch whine, every hesitation in acceleration, it's all communication to him. And in that mechanical language, Robert Mitchell still feels useful, still finds the only meaning that doesn't hurt. His old flip phone almost never rings, but that Tuesday morning it did. Bob was deep in the belly of a Cessna's engine compartment, replacing corroded fuel injectors, when the call came in. The voice on the other end was crisp, military, urgent. "Mr. Mitchell, this is General Patterson from Edwards Air Force Base. We have a critical situation and we need your expertise. How quickly can you get here?" Bob nearly dropped his wrench. It had been nearly 3 decades since anyone in uniform had called him Mr. with that kind of respect in their voice. "I think you've got the wrong guy, General. I'm just a small-time mechanic." "Negative, Mr. Mitchell. You're Robert Mitchell, former Marine Corps sergeant, specialist in turboshaft propulsion systems, developer of the T-700 enhancement protocols." The words hit him like a physical blow. Nobody had mentioned those protocols in 20 years. The work he'd done, the innovations he'd contributed to helicopter engine design, all of it buried under bureaucracy and forgotten by an institution that had discarded him when his hands got scarred. Silence stretched across the desert morning. Bob wiped his scarred hands on his oil-stained coveralls and looked back at the Cessna engine. He thought about hanging up, about returning to the simple world of small planes and modest problems. But there was something in the general's voice, something he hadn't heard in years, the tone of someone who genuinely needed what he could offer. "What kind of situation, General?" "An Apache helicopter with a catastrophic turboshaft failure. Our entire engineering team is stumped. Mr. Mitchell, if you can't fix this, we might lose a $30 million aircraft and potentially compromise national security operations." 2 hours later, Bob was driving his pickup truck down the long approach road to Edwards Air Force Base. The California desert stretched endlessly on both sides, heat waves rising from asphalt like ghosts of his former life. It had been 28 years since he'd stepped onto a military installation. His heartbeat was irregular, caught somewhere between duty and a deep, aching nostalgia that threatened to overwhelm him. He parked near the main gate, took a long breath, grabbed his ancient toolbox from the truck bed, and walked toward the security checkpoint. The airman at the gate couldn't have been more than 20, his eyes scanning Bob from head to toe, lingering on the oil-stained work clothes, scarred hands, and toolbox that looked like it had survived multiple wars. "Name?" "Robert Mitchell. I was called in by General Patterson." The young airman checked his computer, his expression skeptical. "There's no Robert Mitchell authorized for today, sir." Bob stayed calm, his scarred hands relaxed at his sides. He'd learned long ago that explanations only made situations like this more complicated, that dignity often meant accepting skepticism without defending yourself. "Mind checking with the general while I wait?" The airman hesitated, then picked up his phone. The conversation was brief, punctuated with, "Yes, sir," and "Understood, General." When he hung up, his expression had shifted to something approaching respect. "Staff Sergeant Williams will escort you to Hangar 12, sir." Staff Sergeant Williams appeared 2 minutes later, crisp and professional. "Mr. Mitchell, General Patterson asked me to take you to the test facility." They walked silently across the base, past rows of fighter jets and transport aircraft that represented decades of technological evolution since Bob's time in service. He noticed the curious looks from younger airmen, the hushed conversations that stopped as they passed. Williams maintained a slightly faster pace, forcing Bob to speed up despite the stiffness in his hands that came with age and old injuries. "Do you work for a defense contractor, sir?" Williams asked, clearly trying to reconcile Bob's appearance with the urgency of the general's request. Bob hesitated. "I do aircraft maintenance." Williams nodded, but his expression suggested he was expecting someone more official. Hangar 12 was massive, with reinforced steel beams that amplified every sound into an echoing reminder of the serious work conducted within its walls. In the center, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and computer workstations, sat an Apache helicopter that Bob recognized immediately, one of the most advanced attack helicopters in the world, its turboshaft engines representing the pinnacle of military aviation technology. 3 men in crisp flight suits were clustered around the exposed engine, their voices carrying frustration and barely contained panic across the hangar. As Williams and Bob approached, one of them, a Hispanic man in his early 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, looked up with obvious skepticism. "Staff Sergeant, is this the specialist?" The tone wasn't exactly rude, but it carried the weight of someone who had expected a very different kind of expert. Bob could feel their eyes cataloging everything about him: the simple work clothes, the scarred hands, the toolbox that belonged in a museum, the complete absence of anything that suggested advanced technical credentials. "Sir, this is Robert Mitchell." Dr. Rodriguez, according to his name tape, wiped his hands on a pristine towel and extended one in greeting. "Dr. Rodriguez, lead propulsion engineer on Project Silent Thunder. I have to say, we were expecting someone more contemporary. With current security clearances," added the thin engineer with multiple tablets, his eyes never leaving his digital displays. "Someone familiar with modern avionics integration." Bob shook Rodriguez's hand, his scarred fingers rough against the engineer's soft palm. But his eyes were already drawn to the turboshaft engine mounted in the Apache's nacelle. It was a technological masterpiece. Some systems he recognized from his own work decades ago, others that looked like they'd evolved into something almost alien in their sophistication. But underneath all the modern additions, beneath the computer-controlled fuel injection and digital monitoring systems, Bob could see the bones of his own design. The core architecture, the fundamental principles of how hot gases moved through precisely machined metal. It was like looking at a photograph of a child grown into adulthood, recognizable but transformed. What seems to be the problem? "This is a next-generation turboshaft engine designed for stealth operations," Dr. Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years mastering complex systems. "It should provide maximum power with minimal acoustic and thermal signatures, but the prototype has a critical failure. After approximately 18 minutes of operation at combat power, it experiences catastrophic efficiency loss. We've checked every system: fuel injection, combustion chamber monitoring, turbine blade stress analysis, exhaust gas temperature regulation. Nothing explains the failure. We've run computer simulations for 3 weeks," the thin engineer added, gesturing at his tablets. "Every diagnostic suggests the engine should perform perfectly, but real-world testing tells a different story." "Then someone in procurement mentioned your name from some old files," Dr. Rodriguez continued, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely convinced this consultation would be productive. "The project is behind schedule, and frankly, we're running out of options." Bob stepped closer to the engine, his hands instinctively moving toward key inspection points. He could feel the engineer's impatient attention focused on him, their skepticism radiating like heat from an overworked turbine. "Mind if I take a look?" Dr. Rodriguez waved vaguely toward the engine. "Of course, but I should mention we've had 6 specialists here this month. We've spent hundreds of hours running diagnostics. This isn't a simple maintenance issue." Bob opened his toolbox and pulled out a small mechanical stethoscope and an analog vibration gauge. Devices that looked ancient compared to the digital monitoring equipment surrounding the helicopter. He began examining the engine methodically, his scarred fingers moving over surfaces with the familiarity of someone greeting an old friend. Behind him, he could hear whispered conversations. "He's really using those tools?" The thin engineer muttered to Rodriguez. "Maybe we should explain this isn't a crop duster from the 1970s, Dr. Rodriguez said, his voice rising slightly. "This is an advanced military turboshaft with computer-controlled everything." Bob continued his inspection for 25 minutes, testing connections, listening to subtle mechanical harmonics that no computer could quantify, feeling for vibrations that spoke to him in the language he'd learned before these engineers were born. His hands moved with purpose, touching metal in ways that revealed secrets hidden from digital sensors. Finally, he stopped at a specific mounting bracket near the engine's base and stood still for a long moment, his weathered face focused in concentration that seemed to exclude everything else in the hangar. "Did you find something?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, his impatience barely contained. Bob closed his toolbox and turned to face the engineers. "The problem isn't in the engine." "What do you mean?" "It's in the harmonic resonance between the engine mount and the airframe. There's a frequency interference that only develops after the engine reaches full operational temperature and the metal expands. The expansion creates a micro-vibration that throws off the synchronization between the turbine stages." The three engineers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and growing discomfort. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Rodriguez said slowly, "with all due respect, that's not possible. We've tested all mounting systems. The harmonic analysis shows no problematic resonances." "Did you test them after 18 minutes at full combat power while the engine was mounted in the actual airframe?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Did you check the resonance dampening after thermal expansion using analog measurement rather than digital modeling?" The thin engineer glanced at his tablets, then at Dr. Rodriguez. "The computer models show all harmonics within acceptable parameters." "Computer models assume perfect conditions," Bob said quietly. "But metal has memory. This mounting system is fighting against harmonics that were designed into the original architecture 40 years ago. The digital systems can't detect it because they're measuring the wrong frequencies." Dr. Rodriguez folded his arms across his chest. "Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, that sounds like guesswork. We need concrete data, not theories based on intuition." Bob nodded, picked up his toolbox, and started walking toward the hangar exit. "Where are you going?" Williams asked, stepping forward. "You don't need me," Bob said without turning around. "You already know more than I do." Bob left the hangar without hurrying, his silhouette moving steadily toward the parking area, his toolbox swinging gently at his side. Behind him, the three engineers stood in silence, watching him disappear into the bright California sunlight. In the parking lot, Bob started his pickup truck and sat for a few minutes with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the hangar through his windshield. He didn't feel angry, just tired in a way that had become familiar over the years. The exhaustion of being dismissed by people who couldn't recognize knowledge that didn't come with certificates. 4 hours later, Bob's flip phone rang while he was eating a quiet dinner of canned soup and crackers in his garage apartment. It was Dr. Rodriguez, but his voice had completely changed. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Rodriguez. I owe you a profound apology." Bob set down his spoon and listened. "You were absolutely right. We tested the engine under the exact conditions you specified. 18 minutes at full combat power while monitoring harmonic resonance with analog equipment rather than digital modeling. We found the micro-vibration in the mounting system exactly as you described. The frequency interference was there all along, but our computer systems were filtering it out as background noise." Bob didn't say anything, just continued listening. "Sir, I need you to come back. General Patterson would like to speak with you in person. There are things we should have told you from the beginning." The next morning, Bob returned to Hangar 12, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting with a man in military uniform whom Bob recognized by his insignia as the general who had called him. "Mr. Mitchell," General Patterson said, extending his hand with genuine respect. "I owe you an apology for the reception you received yesterday. There's no excuse for the way my people treated you." "There's no need, General." "Yes, there is, sir. Dr. Rodriguez explained what happened. He also told me you identified a failure that our team of specialists couldn't find in 3 weeks." General Patterson paused, studying Bob's face. "Mr. Mitchell, the engine you examined yesterday is based on turboshaft technology you helped develop over 40 years ago. The mounting resonance dampening system you flagged as faulty? It was originally designed using specifications you created in 1982. The hangar fell silent. Dr. Rodriguez and the other engineers listened with expressions of growing understanding and discomfort. "Sergeant Mitchell," General Patterson continued, using Bob's military rank for the first time, "may I ask why one of the original architects of military turboshaft propulsion technology, the man who just saved a $30 million aircraft and possibly prevented a national security failure, is working outside our military system?" Bob could feel their eyes on him. It was the question he'd been waiting to hear for 3 decades, one he'd never known how to answer without sounding bitter. "There was an engine fire during testing, sir, back in '83. I was blamed for pushing the prototype beyond safe parameters. After the burns healed, they decided I was too much of a liability to continue advanced development work." "I understand," General Patterson said quietly. "And I know about the fire. I also know it wasn't your fault, and that your modifications actually prevented a complete catastrophic failure that could have killed the entire test crew." "Doctor." Rodriguez stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea about your background or your contributions to this technology." Bob gave a small nod. "Dr. Rodriguez, don't worry about it. You couldn't have known." General Patterson stepped closer to Bob. "Sergeant, may I make a proposal? We have other projects facing serious technical challenges. Would you be willing to consider consulting work with full recognition of your expertise and contributions?" Bob looked one last time at the Apache helicopter at the far end of the hangar. The artificial lights reflected off its rotor blades, and he could hear the gentle hum of systems running smoothly. No more irregular vibrations, no more harmonic interference, no more failure. "General, I appreciate the offer, I really do, but that chapter of my life is behind me now. I've found peace working on smaller problems with my hands." "I understand and respect that decision," General Patterson replied. "But allow me to make one final gesture." The general pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This contains recognition for your service yesterday and acknowledgement of contributions that should have been honored decades ago. It also includes a formal correction to your military record regarding the 1983 incident." Bob didn't take the envelope immediately. He just looked at it, then at the general's outstretched hand, then back at the helicopter that was no longer failing. "I didn't do it for recognition, sir." "I know," General Patterson replied. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Bob finally took the envelope and slid it into his jacket pocket without opening it. "Thank you, General. Thank you for typing respect." Subscribe for more stories of forgotten heroes who change everything with quiet expertise. Support our mission through Buy Me a Coffee. Link in the first pinned comment. Until next time, true mastery never fades.